You will vacate these premises immediately or face arrest.
The wagon wheel snapped so hard that Samuel Reed nearly lost the reins as the supply wagon lurched sideways on the muddy track. He grabbed the brake lever with one hand and reached beneath the canvas with the other, only to find a thin woman collapsing among the sacks of flour and iron tools. Mei Lin, a railroad interpreter, was hiding there with bruised hands, a torn coat, and a bundle of papers pressed against her chest like they were worth more than her own life. She could barely catch her breath. She had spent 2 days moving between freight yards and labor camps, listening to men who had signed one agreement while being forced to obey another. The papers she carried showed that immigrant workers had been cheated through carefully altered translations, with different promises written in different languages. Samuel had no time to understand all of it, because the men riding behind him were not looking for stolen supplies. They were looking for her. A group of company guards appeared at the top of the road, their horses moving slow and confident. They knew exactly which wagon they were following. Samuel looked at May, then at the road ahead. He had delivered supplies for the railroad for years. He knew those men. He knew the company seals on their documents. And he knew that if they found May hiding beneath his canvas, she might never reach the tribunal waiting at the end of the line. May whispered one sentence that changed the direction of Samuel Reed's life. "Tell them I am your wife." Samuel almost laughed because the request made no sense. He was a contractor, not a hero. He was a man who had spent most of his life avoiding trouble whenever trouble was not paying him. But the fear in her voice was not the fear of someone running from the law. It was the fear of someone who knew the law had already been twisted against innocent people. The guard stopped beside the wagon before Samuel could decide. "Who is traveling with you?" one of them asked. Samuel looked down at the woman beside the cargo. He saw the papers in her hands. He saw the exhaustion on her face, and he understood one thing. If he answered honestly, he would be handing her back to the people she was trying to expose. So Samuel Reed made the choice that would tie his name to hers. "My wife," he said. The guards looked at May. They looked at Samuel. Then they looked at the wagon full of supplies that their company needed delivered. For the moment, the lie worked. But neither Samuel nor May knew how dangerous that lie would become. Because the papers hidden beneath the flour sacks were not just about unfair wages. They showed a pattern of deliberate deception reaching through multiple camps, multiple languages, and hundreds of workers who had no way to prove they had been betrayed. And whatever the railroad company had done to keep those contracts buried, they were willing to do much more to keep them buried forever. For people watching this story, remember this. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can carry across the frontier is not a weapon. Sometimes it is the truth. Samuel tightened his grip on the reins and guided the wagon forward while the guards watched from behind. But inside that wagon, beneath the supplies meant to build the railroad, a different kind of fight had already begun. And before it ended, Samuel would have to decide whether protecting Mei Lin meant losing the business that had supported his entire life. The first mile after the guards disappeared was the quietest mile Samuel Reed had ever traveled. Not because the road was peaceful, because he was waiting for someone to come after him. Mei Lin remained hidden beneath the canvas until the wagon reached an abandoned supply shed near the edge of a small settlement. Samuel had used the place before when storms made the main trail dangerous. It was nothing more than a wooden building with a cracked roof, a rusted stove, and a door that did not close unless someone lifted it first. It was not much, but it was far enough from the railroad road camps to give them a few hours. Samuel helped May step down from the wagon, and he noticed something that bothered him more than the bruises on her hands. She apologized. Not for hiding in his wagon, not for putting him in danger, for needing help at all. "I did not mean to bring trouble to your door," she said. Samuel set down a crate beside the stove. "You already did." May lowered her eyes. Then Samuel added, "But trouble was already riding that road before you climbed in." He did not say it kindly. He was not a man who knew how to say things kindly. But he carried water inside. He lit the stove. and he placed his rifle beside the door where both of them could see it. May noticed. "You expect them to come?" Samuel looked toward the road. "I expect men who chase someone this far don't stop because they lost a trail." She said nothing. That silence told him she agreed. Inside the bundle of papers was the reason. Samuel had seen railroad contracts before. His wagons carried tools, food, lamp oil, and equipment to construction camps all across the territory. He knew the company used different crews from different countries. He knew many workers struggled with English. But he had never asked what happened after those workers signed their names. May spread the papers across an old wooden table. "The workers believed they agreed to one thing," she said. "The company recorded another." Samuel picked up one page. The marks meant little to him. They signed this. They signed a version they understood. She placed another document beside it. "This one says they accepted different wages, different deductions, different conditions." Samuel frowned. "They're not the same contract." "No." Her voice was quiet. "That is the crime." May explained that she had worked as an interpreter between supervisors and immigrant crews. She had been trusted because she could speak with workers who had no other way to defend themselves. At first, she believed misunderstandings were mistakes. Then she found the pattern. The company did not accidentally mistranslate the agreements. They changed them. Samuel stared at the papers longer than he wanted to, because he recognized the company's seal. He recognized some of the supply orders attached to those camps. His own business name appeared on receipts connected to locations where workers had been cheated. May saw his expression change. "You knew." Samuel looked up sharply. "I knew where my wagons went, not what happened there." The answer was not an accusation. That made it worse. Samuel turned away. For years, he had told himself that a man delivered goods. He did not ask questions about what happened after. But now the questions were sitting on his table, and they had Mei Lin's handwriting beside them. A sound came from outside. Both of them froze. Not a horse. Not a wagon. A boot. Someone had stepped near the shed. Samuel reached for the rifle. May quickly gathered the papers. "Hide those," he whispered. She looked at him. "You believe me?" Samuel kept his eyes on the door. "I believe someone is willing to chase you over paper." Another step sounded outside. Then another. The door handle moved. Samuel stood between May and the entrance. The same man who had spent years avoiding conflict was now protecting the one person who could. Expose the company that had provided his livelihood. The door opened slightly, but no one entered. A folded paper slid across the floor. Samuel waited until the footsteps disappeared before picking it up. It was a warning. A company notice carrying an official seal. It said Samuel Reed was suspected of transporting stolen documents and assisting a criminal. May read it carefully. Then she looked at him. "They know your name now." Samuel folded the paper. He already knew that. What he did not know was whether he could still separate himself from her fight. Because the railroad had not only found Mei Lin, they had found the one man whose supplies helped them build their empire. ID equals K2F7QM. By sunrise, the warning paper was no longer just a threat. It was proof that Samuel Reed had crossed a line he could not uncross. The railroad company had not sent armed men to drag him away. They had done something more dangerous. They had used paper. They had placed his name inside an official notice, accused him of crimes, and made it appear as if the law itself was standing against him. Samuel knew how powerful that could be. On the frontier, most people did not fear a rifle as much as they feared a document with the right seal. A man with a gun could be seen. A man with authority could ruin you before anyone realized you were bleeding. May studied the notice again. "This is how they stop people," she said. Samuel looked at her. "By accusing them?" by making everyone afraid to speak after. She folded the paper carefully. The workers I helped were not ignorant. They knew something was wrong. They knew their wages disappeared. They knew their families could not survive on what they were paid. She paused. But when the company told them the contracts were written by officials and approved by the railroad, they believed there was no one who would listen. Samuel looked toward the wagon outside. For years, he had delivered supplies to those camps. Flour, tools, blankets, medicine. He had always believed he was providing honest work. Now he wondered how many people had suffered while he looked only at the delivery receipts. "What do you need from me?" he asked. May hesitated. That surprised him. She had risked everything to reach the tribunal, yet she still looked uncertain, asking for help. "I need a wagon." Samuel almost smiled. "You already have one. I need a man willing to drive it all the way." That answer stayed between them, because they both knew what she was really asking. Not just transportation, a witness. Someone whose name could stand beside hers. Samuel looked at the warning notice. "If I take you there, the railroad comes after me." "They already are." He had no answer for that. Before he could speak, a knock came from the settlement store nearby. Samuel stepped outside carefully. An older worker stood there holding a worn hat in both hands. His name was Daniel Wu, one of the laborers from the eastern camps. He had heard that Mei Lin was alive and had come because he carried something important. A payroll book. Daniel placed it on the table. "The company says we misunderstood," he said. May opened the book. Her expression changed. Inside were numbers showing deductions taken from workers' pay. Beside each amount was a translation note. The English version claimed the workers accepted the charges. The translated version they had been shown never mentioned them. Samuel looked at the pages. The evidence was no longer one woman's claim. It was a pattern. May looked at Daniel. "Will you testify?" The older worker became quiet. Outside, a company wagon passed slowly on the road. Everyone noticed. Nobody spoke. Daniel watched it disappear. "They will take our jobs." Samuel understood that fear. The railroad did not need to lock every person away. It only needed to make people believe they would lose everything if they told the truth. Then another voice came from the doorway. A local shopkeeper stood there holding another stack of papers. "I have copies," he said. Everyone turned. He swallowed. "The company bought supplies from me too. They told me the workers were receiving fair treatment." He looked ashamed. "I never asked for proof." Samuel looked around the room. One by one, people were realizing the same thing. The railroad's strength came from everyone believing they were alone. But the truth was beginning to connect them. That afternoon, Samuel made a decision. He loaded the wagon. Not with supplies. With evidence. Contracts. Payroll records. Witness statements. Anything that could survive the journey to the labor tribunal. May watched him secure the papers beneath a false floorboard. "You know what happens if we fail?" Samuel tightened the last wooden panel. "Yes." "They will say we lied." "Yes." "They will say the workers misunderstood." Samuel looked at the railroad notice still sitting on the table. Then he looked at the people who had finally stepped forward. "No." His voice was calm. "They will say that if we let them." May studied him. "You are not the same man who pulled me out of that wagon." Samuel looked away. "Maybe I am." He paused. "Maybe I just finally saw what was in front of me." Before they could leave, riders appeared at the edge of town. 3 company guards. And behind them was a railroad official carrying a clean coat, polished boots, and a folder of legal papers. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply walked forward like a man who believed the world already belonged to him. His name was Charles Whitmore, and he had come to prove one thing, that a railroad company with enough money could make the truth disappear before it ever reached a courtroom. Whitmore stopped in front of Samuel's wagon. "Mr. Reed," he said politely, "I believe you are carrying something that does not belong to you." Samuel stood beside May. For the first time, he did not step aside. "No." Whitmore smiled slightly. "Be careful. Men who confuse kindness with courage usually regret it." Samuel looked back at the wagon, then at May, then at the workers standing behind them. "I reckon we'll find out." But as Whitmore opened his folder, Samuel saw the document inside. A court order, one that could stop their journey before it ever began. The court order looked official. That was the first thing Samuel noticed. Not the words, not the accusations, the seal. The railroad had understood something important. Most people never question a document that looked powerful enough. Whitmore held the paper where everyone could see it. By order of the territorial office, these materials are to be surrendered pending investigation. No one moved. The workers looked at Samuel. The townspeople looked at the ground. And for one brief moment, the old fear returned. The same fear that had kept men silent while their wages disappeared. The same fear that had convinced honest people that speaking the truth would only make them the next person destroyed. Samuel looked at the paper, then at May. "What happens if we hand them over?" he asked. May did not answer immediately. She did not need to. Everyone already knew. The documents would vanish. The witnesses would scatter. And by the time anyone asked questions, the railroad would have another explanation ready. Whitmore stepped closer. "Mr. Reed, this does not have to become unpleasant." Samuel almost admired how calmly the man said it. "Almost." "You mean it does not have to become unpleasant for you?" Whitmore's smile disappeared. "You are a supply contractor, not a reformer. You have no reason to throw away your business over strangers." The words struck harder than Samuel expected. Because they were partly true. He had spent years building his company, his wagons, his routes, his reputation. All of it depended on contracts from the railroad. Whitmore knew exactly where to press. "You can still walk away." Samuel looked at the workers behind him. Men who had worked through freezing mornings. Men who had signed papers they could not read. Men who had trusted that someone somewhere had written the truth. Then Samuel looked at the wagon, at the hidden floorboard, at the evidence he had once thought belonged only to May. "No," he said. Whitmore narrowed his eyes. "No." Samuel stepped between him and the wagon. "No, because it turns out those papers do belong to me." Everyone looked surprised. Samuel continued. "My wagons carried the supplies into those camps. My name is on those receipts. If people were cheated while I helped build those places, then I have more reason than anyone to see the truth written down." Whitmore's expression hardened. "That is a foolish thing to admit." "Maybe." Samuel reached for the wagon reins. "But it is an honest thing." Whitmore gave a small signal. The guards moved forward. The workers stepped back. For a moment, it looked like the railroad would win without firing a shot. Then Daniel Wu stepped beside Samuel. "I will testify." Another worker moved forward. "So will I." Then another. The fear did not disappear, but it stopped controlling them. Whitmore looked at the growing group. "You think a few statements will defeat the railroad?" May answered, "No." She held up the contracts. "The truth will." That was when the first shot came. Not from Samuel. Not from the workers. From the edge of town. A bullet struck the wagon wheel. The horses panicked. The wagon carrying the evidence lurched forward, breaking loose from the post. Someone had decided the court order was not enough. The evidence had to disappear before it reached the judge. Samuel ran. May ran with him. The wagon rolled toward the old river crossing outside town, where the bridge had already been weakened by spring flooding. "Stop it!" someone shouted. But the wagon was moving too fast. Samuel reached the reins and grabbed them with both hands. The horses fought against him. The wagon wheels slipped toward the broken edge of the bridge. May climbed onto the back. "The documents." Samuel held the reins. "You get the papers. You will fall." He looked at her. "Then don't waste the chance." She crawled beneath the canvas while the wagon shook violently. Behind them, company riders approached. Ahead of them, the damaged bridge waited. For one terrible moment, Samuel thought the wagon would go over. Then Daniel and the other workers arrived with ropes. They were afraid. But they came. Together, they pulled. The wagon stopped inches from the broken boards. The evidence survived. But the fight was not over, because the railroad had already prepared its second attack. The courtroom. The labor tribunal was crowded when Samuel, May, and the workers arrived. The railroad entered with confidence. They had lawyers, official papers, a respected company name. Samuel had a damaged wagon and a stack of documents that some people still wanted to dismiss. At first, it looked exactly as Whitmore had planned. The company representative argued that the workers had misunderstood the agreements. He said the translations were complicated. He said deductions were standard. He said May Lin had created confusion because she opposed the railroad. The judge studied the documents. Then he looked at May. "Can you prove these translations were intentionally changed?" The room became silent. This was the question, not whether the workers suffered. Everyone knew they had, but whether the railroad had done it deliberately. May stepped forward. "I can show what they were told." She placed 2 contracts on the table. They gave workers one translation to read. She placed another beside it. They filed another translation for the company records. The railroad attorney immediately objected. "These are copies. Anyone could have altered them." The judge looked uncertain. For a moment, Samuel felt the room slipping away. The same polished doubt. The same powerful people. The same quiet moment where truth could disappear because someone sounded more official. Then Daniel Wu stood. The attorney turned. "You are one of the workers?" "Yes." "You cannot read the English version." Daniel looked down. Then he looked at May. "No." The attorney smiled. "Then how do you know you were deceived?" Daniel was silent. Samuel saw the fear return. The room waited. Whitmore watched him carefully. Daniel almost stepped back. Then he reached into his coat. He pulled out a small piece of paper. "My name was written here." The judge took it. Daniel continued. "When May Lin read the agreement to us, this line said we would be paid after expenses agreed upon." He pointed at the English document. "But the company record says we accepted unlimited deductions." The attorney interrupted. "That proves nothing." Daniel looked at him. "It proves they needed us not to understand." The courtroom went quiet. Then the clerk who had processed the contracts slowly stood. Everyone turned. He looked toward Whitmore. The railroad official gave him a warning glance. The clerk froze. His hands shook. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then May said quietly, "Tell the truth once, and you will not have to carry it alone forever." The clerk lowered his eyes. "I saw the changes." The railroad attorney stood. "Do you understand what you are admitting?" The clerk swallowed. "Yes." His voice became stronger. "I am admitting I was afraid. That was the moment the case changed. Not because one paper appeared. Not because one person gave a perfect speech. because the silence protecting the railroad finally broke. The clerk explained how the company prepared different versions of the agreements. He explained how workers received one translation while official records carried another. The judge examined the dates, the signatures, the attached payroll records. The evidence connected. The railroad's carefully built story began falling apart piece by piece. Whitmore finally spoke. "You are allowing a disgruntled interpreter and frightened laborers to damage years of honest business." The judge looked at him. "No." He lifted the documents. "I am allowing records and testimony to determine what happened." By the end of the hearing, the tribunal ruled that the contracts had been intentionally misrepresented. The workers would receive a review of unpaid wages. The altered agreements would be investigated, and the railroad officials responsible would face further proceedings. The company had not been defeated by anger. It had been defeated by people who finally stood together. Outside the courthouse, May stood beside Samuel. "You lost your contracts," she said. Samuel looked at the crowd of workers leaving the building. "Maybe." He looked at the wagon. "But I stopped carrying things I was too afraid to see." May smiled faintly. For the first time since she climbed beneath his canvas, she looked less like someone running away, and more like someone who had finally reached a place where the truth could stand. But Samuel noticed one thing. She still kept a small bundle of papers close to her chest. Even after winning. Even after the court. Because some fears take longer to leave than the people who caused them. Months after the tribunal ruling, Samuel Reed still woke before sunrise. For a while, he thought that habit would never leave him. Every morning, when a wagon wheel creaked outside his home, his hand moved toward the rifle beside the door before he remembered there was no one coming to take Maylin away. The railroad had lost its power to hide the truth. But fear was slower to surrender. May understood that better than anyone. Even after the workers received new agreements and the investigation began, she still kept her important papers wrapped in cloth and placed within reach every night. Samuel noticed it the first week after they returned, then the second, then the third. One evening, he watched her check the bundle before sitting down for supper. "You know those papers are safe," he said. May looked at them. "I know. But you still check." She was quiet. Then she answered honestly. "I spent too long knowing that a piece of paper could decide whether someone was believed or forgotten." Samuel understood. Because he had once believed the same thing, that official papers mattered more than people. That a man's responsibility ended when he delivered what he was paid to deliver. But the journey to the tribunal had changed him. Not with one grand moment. With small choices. Opening his wagon. Sharing his name. Standing beside people who had been told nobody would listen. The old supply route changed too. Samuel no longer carried only railroad orders. He carried supplies for independent workers and communities that wanted fair agreements written clearly in languages everyone could understand. May help create new contract translations. Not hidden versions. Not company versions. One agreement. One meaning. One truth. The first time a group of workers signed those papers, they asked May to read every line aloud. She did. Slowly. Carefully. And when they finished, nobody looked confused. Nobody looked afraid. That mattered more than Samuel expected. Years later, people remembered the case as the moment when the railroad learned it could not build an empire on words that only some people were allowed to understand. But Samuel remembered something smaller. He remembered the abandoned supply shed where May first stepped out from beneath his canvas. He remembered thinking she had brought trouble. He remembered being wrong. The woman who once hid from the railroad became the person many communities trusted when they needed contracts explained fairly. She taught other interpreters how to protect workers from being trapped by language they could not read. Samuel continued driving wagons. But his work became different. He was no longer just moving goods. He was moving trust. And that was something he valued more than any contract the railroad could offer. Still, one fear remained. Sometimes, when May heard boots outside the door, she would stop speaking. Sometimes, when a stranger arrived carrying official papers, her hand would move toward the old bundle before she remembered she was no longer alone. Samuel never told her to forget. He knew some wounds were not erased. They were healed by being met with patience again and again. So he would simply light the stove, set another cup on the table, and leave the door open. One evening, years later, May found the old railroad notice Samuel had kept from the beginning. The paper that had accused him of helping a criminal. She expected him to have destroyed it. Instead, he had folded it carefully and stored it beside the first honest contract they created together. "Why keep this?" she asked. Samuel looked at the two papers. "Because one tells me what they thought we were." He touched the second. "And the other tells me what we chose to become." May smiled. The same woman who once hid beneath a wagon canvas now sat openly beside the man who had risked everything to protect her truth. No guards followed her. No one demanded silence. No one controlled the words on the page. The door behind them remained unlocked. Not because the world had become perfect, but because some people had learned that fear could not be the only thing waiting at the door. So if this story reminds you that courage sometimes begins with one person saying, "I believe you," share where you are watching from, and remember this. A wagon can carry supplies. A contract can carry promises. But one honest person willing to stand beside another can carry a truth farther than either. And sometimes, that is how a frontier changes.